Welcome, welcome wherever you are this fine day. I don't know for sure that it's a fine day where you are, but here in Colorado, it's a fine day about 300 days a year. The sun comes out. It might be a little chilly. You know, the air does get cool and it can dip down into the 30s on occasion, but it's always a fine day. And if you know Jesus, it's always a fine day anyway. My name is Sean Boonstra. You are listening to the Disclosure broadcast on the Voice of Prophecy Radio Network. Now, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the healthcare debate in America, but if you actually live in this country like I do, now I'm an immigrant, right? But I live here in America, and if you live here like I do, I'm guessing you're paying very careful attention to that debate. And even if you do happen to live north of the 49th parallel up in Canada like I used to, that's my home country, I'm guessing you're still paying attention because for some reason Americans love to hold out Canadian single-payer health care as an example of what they don't want, and the Canadians love to return the favor saying, well, American health care, that's what we don't want. But the real reason most people pay attention to the debate has nothing to do with economic models or political ideology. I think the real reason people are paying attention to the health debate is because the entire healthcare system in America is currently in upheaval, and people are wondering whether or not they're going to be safe and secure for the future, or if some big medical event like a heart attack or cancer or a stroke is going to wipe them out financially. So it's a tough debate, but I guess one of the good things that has come out of all of this debating, all of this talking, all of this controversy is actually a higher level of awareness when it comes to issues of health and well-being. People are starting to pay attention to things like diet and exercise and other obvious factors that contribute to our overall well-being. We know, obviously, everybody knows that diet and exercise can ward off lifestyle diseases like obesity or diabetes. But the question I want to ask today is this: what do you do when you're dealing with illnesses that are not so easy to identify? For example, what if you're dealing with stress, which we know for sure, if the stress is bad, if it's a high level, and if it's continual, we know for sure that it can actually lead to physical illnesses. So what do you do? What do you do if you're feeling overwhelmed by all of your day-to-day commitments? What if your to-do list at work or at home is so big, so huge, that it actually makes you break out in a cold sweat? You panic a little bit, or maybe you panic a lot to the point where you find yourself struggling to function at all. It's just too overwhelming. What do you do if you're dealing with an addiction problem? And I don't just mean addiction to drugs or alcohol, but all of the addictions that we're faced with these days. Screen addictions. Some people are wrestling with pornography addictions, behavioral addictions. What do you do with that? How do you deal with the guilt that comes along with some of those addictions because you've been lying or covering up, or you find yourself inadequate or unable to shake off this problematic behavior, and your life is now riddled with guilt. You don't know what to think of yourself. Listen, right now, all across the country, millions of people are suffering from the devastating effects of anxiety, stress, and depression. And today, if that describes you, I think you're going to want to stick around for this program, because there's a brand new book out. It's sitting on the desk in my office. It's called The Power of Hope. And when I read that book, I knew I wanted to meet the authors, and so with me today on the show is one of the authors, Dr. Julian Melgosa, who holds a degree in psychology from the University of Madrid, a doctorate in educational psychology from Andrews University. He's a member of the British Psychological Society, and he specializes in emotional health. But I think most importantly, he's here with us today. Dr. Melgosa, welcome to the program.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Hey, listen, the book was phenomenal. It's sitting on my desk upstairs. I read it. I was moved to tears at one point. I think it's a book that everybody should get their hands on, and we'll give links in the program today as to where people can find that. I think Ruben, our producer, will put it in the show notes. You co-authored this with Mikkelsen Borges from the University of Santa Catarina, Federal University in Brazil, and Brazil Adventist University. I want to talk about mental health and well-being because that's really one of the key focuses, or foci, I guess, Latin plural, of the book. You state in the book, and I'm not sure which chapters you authored and which ones Mikkelsen authored, but in the book it does state there's a clear relationship between thoughts, behavior, and the state of mind. And so here's a question that's always intrigued me, because we live in a world where everybody's trying to find, a genetic reason for my behavior. And I can't help myself because it's wired into my genes. And the question that crosses my mind all the time is this: do our thoughts shape our behavior, or does our behavior actually shape our thoughts?
Well, I think it goes in both ways. There are plenty of studies that show that you can decide, or you can have a great deal of control of your behavior based on your state of mind. You can prepare yourself mentally to face a challenge or to meet a person. But it is also true, and it doesn't seem as obvious, that when you engage in certain behavior, it becomes a precursor of a state of mind. For example, if you are engaged in some service behavior, and you do it at the beginning just because a friend told you, let's go here to distribute this food to poor people, or to help these
Sure.
ill people. You do it and you repeat it and over, and then you start feeling the consequence of a good behavior, which is a peaceful state of mind. It's a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction, and all those are mental processes that have come as a result of having done something.
Well, doctor, I'm a natural introvert. I actually am probably an off the charts introvert, which surprises some people because I live in the public for a living. Are you saying that if I were to put myself out there, get involved? I know my daughters were involved in a local food bank this weekend. It's not natural for me to go out and relate to a group of people, but I can actually learn to love that atmosphere by doing it?
I believe so. There are things that have limits because of our personality, which is largely inherited, and temperament that set up limits. But that doesn't mean that you cannot go beyond the normal, natural inclinations that you have just through exercise, practice, doing it. Obviously, there are many beautiful stories of people that have been transformed, and they have even changed their personality just through engaging in behaviors that are positive, or they are rewarding. So yes, you can certainly vary your style, your personal style, through practice.
Well, listen, there is a statement. I mean, that's good news to me because it's been 25 years. I speak publicly for a living, and I've noticed it getting better. It doesn't go away. I mean, the anxiety I feel doesn't go away, but it certainly improves over time. There's a statement in the book that says we are all in control of our thoughts. And I sat back in my chair when I read that statement, and I thought this: what if I'm not in control of my thoughts? Because sometimes it feels like my thoughts actually control me. I notice there's a problem. Oh my goodness, the roof is leaking. I'll fix it in the morning. Well, I can't. That thought won't leave my brain all night long, and I keep thinking about that. If I feel like my thoughts control me, I think the phrase in the book is rein in your thoughts. You say that it's possible to actually learn to control your thoughts rather than have your thoughts control you.
Well, that is the whole challenge of cognitive behavioral approaches in psychology. We know that a lot of good things and bad things happen in our lives because we have been thinking about it. Some of the most painful experiences are people who are under the effect of a trauma, and they experience post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. There are thoughts that come, and they can not have control over them, and they require treatment, and treatment is successful, relatively successful, and time does a lot to free oneself from these thoughts. But that would be an extreme. But yes, for example, addictive behaviors. Addictive behaviors are dealt with in ways that have to do with a process that is called thought stopping. People who are addicted, say, to food, and they are in a meeting sitting, and they are thinking about the sweet or the hamburger or whatever it is,
Right.
the nature of their desire, and they are having fantasies over that. And they want to come back to the business, but they just cannot because that is in their mind. And at some point, they have to excuse themselves, and they have to leave the room because they just want to quickly use the food that they may have in their drawer in their office, or go outside and buy it. That is the moment where the psychotherapist will focus on. Whenever those thoughts come, what do you do? And if people are not trained, they haven't been told what to do, they may end up rehearsing, going over and over. So, well, I cannot do anything. It's just so strong that I have to just try to quench that desire. Well, there are ways to be prepared for that. And being prepared means you know what you are going to do when those strong thoughts come. Usually we think of something to substitute it, something that is already there. It can be an experience of the past, a friendship, even a movie. It can be for the believer a moment of prayer, a moment that you say stop it, and then you just pray and pray very fervently until the moment passes, because it is true that those obsessive thoughts, they are not there all the time. They come and go, like hunger and thirst. Eventually you have to do something about it, but the critical time of the thought, it can be addressed with some preparation. And certainly many of those things are learned in the counseling room, and many of those things are learned, with people who are interested, and they just hear ideas or read in self-help books and find a way to deal with that critical moment that there is an obsessive thought or a recurring thought or a thought of, let's call it quotes unquote, temptation to behave in ways that one does not want to.
So it sounds like there's actually the possibility. I see that we're up against a break here, but it sounds like what you can do, I heard you use the word replace. Is it possible then to lay down a new habit, a new neural pathway, so to speak, over top of the negative habit and retrain yourself to do something positive with that impulse?
Absolutely. That is the best way to describe the moment when you are dealing with thoughts that are undesirable. You have something in place, you do it, you practice a few times, you will realize that in the end they will stop pushing as they used to.
Okay, we're up against the break. I see the clock running out on me. I'm with Dr. Julian Melgosa, co-author of a brand new book from Pacific Press called The Power of Hope. It's a book that gave me a lot of hope, and I think you'll enjoy it too. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And when we come back from the break, we've been talking about whether or not your thoughts need to control you, or you can learn to control your thoughts. And we're going to explore a little bit what benefits the Christian faith might have for this and what the Bible might have. And actually, Dr. Melgosa and his co-author, Mickelson Borges, talk a little bit also about the physiological benefits of improving what goes on in your brain, how you think can affect the state, the health of your physical body. You are listening to Disclosure. My name is Sean Boonstra. This is the flagship program of the Voice of Prophecy Network, and we'll be right back.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions? Like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Does my life really matter to God? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers that you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter the most to you. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
You are listening to Disclosure from the Voice of Prophecy Radio Network. My name is Sean Boonstra. For better or for worse, I'll be your host for the next, I guess we have about 42 minutes of programming left today. But you don't want to stick around for me. You want to stick around for our guest, Dr. Julian Melgosa, author of a brand new book, The Power of Hope from Pacific Press. You can find the link to that book on our show notes for today. Dr. Melgosa, just before the break, we were talking about addictive behaviors and compulsive thinking, and you were mentioning that one of the best things you can do is find a substitute behavior.
Correct. That is true.
Now, listen, we were also mentioning, I promised before the break that we would look at physiological benefits. It seems to me that, if we're talking about thoughts shaping behavior, behavior shaping thoughts, that there's got to be some kind of, there's got to kind of be some sort of spillover into your physical health. Does how you think matter for your physical health?
Absolutely. There are plenty of designs, research designs that consist of dividing people that are coming out of a specific type of surgery and, dividing them based on some sort of tool, psychological instrument, and finding out whether or not they use, say, positive thinking. Or let's take, for example, gratitude. I can think of a study that was done a couple of years ago in Italy and consisted of classifying women who had been diagnosed with breast cancer and dividing them up into two groups based on psychological testing. The ones who used gratitude in spite of the situation that they were living through, and the ones who didn't. And then take a look at how the treatment was progressing, how the various stages of healing were reached, and it seemed clear that those who had expressed gratitude or had been having thinking of gratitude were the ones that were more advanced in the after operation process, in the treatment, and in the general health, physical health, as opposed to those ones who had a low level of gratitude, or even were using remorse or other negative emotions. Gratitude is one of the most studied these days factors in both mental and physical health.
Well, you mentioned that recovery times are better for people who express gratitude and have a positive outlook. I think I've seen studies years ago that people who laugh more in recovery and enjoy life more tend to recover more quickly.
That is correct. Yeah. Laughter is one of the healthiest things that can happen to people. And but it's not only the exterior manifestation, just a mind that is peaceful, a mind that is not anxious about the future because of fear of death. That is the best kind of supplementary treatment that someone with a terminal disease can receive.
I want to come back to that a little bit later in the program, the fear of death, because Hebrews 2:15 mentions that Christians become free. We're no longer slaves to the fear of death, and that's a thought I want to bring up a little bit later on. I guess the question that I've got is, okay, I can recover more quickly with the right outlook. Can I prevent disease with the right outlook?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is a established fact from the historic studies of stress. When people are full of fear, when people are under a lot of stress, any proclivity that they may have to acquire a disease, it becomes very, very risky. And people who are very strong, they are much less likely to get a disease in spite of the stress. But everybody has weaknesses. For some is the digestive systems, for others is the cardiovascular. Everybody has a weakness, and stress works negatively on whatever weak point we may have. And yes, indeed, if someone is subject to that sort of influence that comes from the environment and from their own thoughts, then they become closer and closer to contract the disease.
That seems, I don't know if it's fair to say this then. It would seem to me that if you adopt a pessimistic worldview and, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to die, just thinking that way probably enhances the likelihood that it's actually going to happen.
Yes. I have taught undergraduate psychology for many years, and I remember talking to students about this, just asking in the classroom, and it was a typical thing of someone that openly would say, "Well, my roommate was with flu, and I was afraid that I was going to get it. I was almost certain that I was going to get the flu because my roommate had the flu, and I came down with the flu." And surprisingly, I heard others that says, "Well, I am protected. I have a good immune system. I'm going to eat well. I'm going to do exercise. I'm going to be outside and breathe a lot of fresh air. And my mechanism is going to protect me. I have a lot of things to do, and I must do them. I cannot afford being ill." And in the end, I didn't get sick. These are simple. Incidental comments and anecdotal quote-unquote evidence, but I think they speak of what the truth that is behind, and is that if you are afraid of something, not that you are going to automatically get it, but you are increasing your chances of getting it, and this happens especially with infectious diseases.
That's fascinating to me. So that your immune system actually seems to be in tune with your thoughts, and that you, to some degree, whether consciously or subconsciously, you're actually regulating your immune system.
Yes, there is a whole field in medicine that is called psychoneuroimmunology that deals just with this issue. And there are studies for every organic system of the body that are showing a link between the emotions, the attitude, the approach of life, and the development of various diseases. And this goes from tuberculosis to AIDS to any infectious disease, and even non-infectious diseases that get complicated when people are negativistic about their condition or about their circumstance.
It's one thing to know then, for me particularly, if I think negatively, I'm actually enhancing the chances of something going wrong. I guess the question is, how do I learn to stop that? The book talks about deceitful and negative self-talk and some of the harmful narratives that we play in our heads. What do we do about it? What are those narratives that we play in our heads? What's negative self-talk?
Well, that's a very good concept, and I think the same way that we advise people to eat vegetables and fruits, and everybody has this clear, very few people have idea on how to care for your mental health, and this is one typical example. What is your self-thought that is working against you? There are people that consider themselves unable to do something, and then they just have a little line that is something like, "This is not for me." "Oh, no, this is not for me." And they have repeated that so many times, "Oh, this is not for me," that in the end, they are closing the door to do a broad range of behaviors that would be perfectly fine for them to do. But they have learned to talk to themselves, "This is not for me," or "I'm not good at that," or "I'm too young," or "I'm too old," or whatever their particular narrative has been. Those are very dangerous thoughts. And those are the ones that people have to catch, identify, and start replacing with others and forgetting them because they are illogical. They are just not correct.
Where do those thoughts come from then? I mean, I would have to assume that thought got planted in my brain at some point in the past, and that I'm actually living in the past then.
Yes, a lot of the insecurities, a lot of the wrong habits in thinking come from early learning. Whatever my mother, my father, my teacher, my friends have been telling me, how they have been reacting to my behavior, it influences some people more than others. They develop their self-concept, they develop their self-idea on what they can do or they cannot do. And if they continue in that line, they become convinced of very serious limitations. And this is just one example, about ability. This is not for me. But there are plenty of ways to think about your past. And I think you mentioned at the beginning, this is something that they treated me that way, so I am caught up with this. They abused me when I was a child. Therefore, I am bound to have emotional problems for the rest of my life. Well, it is true that early trauma can work against you, but it is also true that we are able to work against that. And for the people who believe, I am a person of faith, we also have to trust in a power that goes beyond psychology and consists of trusting God, that can take the past and turn it into something positive. So going back to those bad thoughts, we need to identify them, and then we need to do something about them.
You mentioned faith, and I deeply appreciate that about this book because it really goes back to the Scriptures and lifts out principles from the Word of God that can help with that. And I think one of the parts that I really deeply appreciated was the quote from Philippians 3, where Paul talks about forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things which are ahead. I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God. So is there a element of faith that helps us move past the past and start looking for the future?
Yeah, I am convinced of that. That very text that you have mentioned is one of the most beautiful promises that we need to become aware of what God wants us to do. And if He wants us to do, if I have a clear purpose in my life, then it doesn't matter how strong the past may have been, because I am just looking ahead. And the one that is giving me this assurance from above is the one that is going to lead me there. Now, having said that, we have to also be careful not to think that every single trauma is going to be completely wiped out without doing anything else. God is capable of doing miracles. Sometimes He chooses not to, and leave it up to us to work on the things that we as human beings can do. And that is where some of the tips of this book and many other self-help books can help someone to really deal with the past in a natural way. We cannot wipe it up. Someone who went through poverty or certain experiences that are bitter, you cannot wipe that out, but you can start looking at it with an outlook of even the good sides of it. The fact of having limited resources sometimes, and this is the example of poverty, sometimes help people to really become strong, to face difficulties with much more toughness than someone that has always had all the resources at hand. Well, look at those things. What has that early experience helped me with?
Okay, I'm up against a break, Dr. Melgosa. We have to take that. I want to come right back to that thought because I noticed that in my own life. I'm the son of immigrants who left Europe after the Second World War, and my grandparents, of course, were Depression era, and I know it affected our thinking. I do want to come back to that thought and then talk about depression a little bit. My guest today, not my doctor, my guest is Dr. Julian Melgosa. We'll be right back after this message.
Creation, evolution. Where did the world come from? Where did you come from? Were you created in an instant? Did you evolve from another animal or life species? These are issues that are discussed in classrooms, textbooks, and sometimes around your break table at work, when the conversation suddenly turns serious. These kinds of questions are answered in our free Discover Bible guides. These 26 beautifully illustrated guides cover all the major themes of the Bible, and they answer some of the hardest questions of life. You can get your free copy just for the asking by contacting me. Go to VOP.com and click on the tab that says Study. That's VOP.com, the tab that says Study, or phone me, 888-456-7933. That's 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible guides, available just for the asking.
And we are back from the break. I hope you had a good rest in the break. And just before we left and went off the air, I mentioned that I have my doctor in the house. And I admit I'd I'd misstated that. My guest, I should have said, and said my doctor. However, thinking about it in the break, I thought, well, I really am benefiting from this discussion. So for today, Dr. Melgosa is my doctor, and he's helping me understand what happens when we allow negative self-talk to take over our lives and how living in the past causes problems. And actually, Dr. Melgosa, before we went to the break, I was talking about the fact that I noticed some of what you talked about in my own parents' generation. They fled Europe right after the Second World War. My grandparents were sort of Depression era, and it absolutely affected how they approached life for the rest of their lives. There is always an aspect of the past that shapes how you face the future, right?
Absolutely, yes. We grow up in certain ways, and we become who we are because of the past that we have lived. So that we cannot erase, but we can make the best out of the past. The people who have had a good past sometimes even say, "Well, I would have liked to have some exciting thing." Well, think in terms of how privileged you are to having had that kind of past. And those who have had barriers in their lives, think about how much strength you have gained out of those difficulties, and be thankful, be grateful for that. Gratitude, as we mentioned before, is one of the most powerful emotions that we can experience. And there are wonderful experiences of people and studies that are done with hundreds of individuals that show that gratitude affects not only well-being, but also enhances good health.
The book refers to depression as excess past, and I think I really liked that phrase. Can you help me understand it a little better? Why is depression a case of excess past?
Well, depression is, in addition to being an organic illness, because it has processes that are found in neurotransmitters in the brain, and it has to do with biology. It has to do also with the choice of thoughts. Dr. Aaron Beck, one of the pioneers of cognitive behavioral psychology, initially trained as a psychiatrist, discovered this because when he did his internship as psychiatrist, he found that depressive people had a particular thinking style. This was something that before hadn't been thought about it. He talked to many, he listened to many of them, and started to realize that they had a negativistic, catastrophic type of thinking. And then he started to realize that it was so uniform that he thought, well, if we could come up with a way to make these people change their thought pattern, then we will be, it is likely that they will come to normality. And that was the beginning of perhaps the most widely used, especially in North America, approach to the treatment of mental disorders, apart from the pharmacological side. In terms of psychotherapy, it is the most common. And depression is one of those disorders that can be successfully treated with cognitive behavioral interventions. Consist of helping you to identify thoughts that are illogical, that they are catastrophic, that they are extremely negativistic, thoughts of fear, and start looking at alternatives on what to replace them with. And that is, the reason of that expression. Most of those thoughts have to do with a feeling of misery about one's past and how unfortunate I am. And then, of course, if this is accompanied by a natural inclination to the illness, because we are different in that sense. There are people who are more prone and others that are less. So if you get someone who is prone to the disease and is utilizing these kinds of thoughts, then the illness is almost sure.
One of the things that I found interesting in relation to depression is the book talks about the fact that casual sexual encounters can be a causative factor in depression. It can actually lead to a state of depression. And I found that fascinating because, of course, ever since the sexual revolution here in the Western world, there's a lot of casual sex. I mean, there are children who don't even know now what the sexual mores and standards of the last generation used to be. and there's a lot of depression that people and anxiety that people seem to be dealing with. Why is there a connection between casual sexual encounters and depression?
Sex, as God created, it should be an experience that is full of love, acceptance, intimacy that casual sex does not have. Guilt is another ingredient in there. In spite of the sexual revolution of the 60s and the 70s and all the forgiveness that has been offered about this kind of behavior, there must be something. There must be something in the inner self that still tells you there's something wrong about this. And guilt is one of the enemies of mental health. Sometimes guilt is good because it tells us that we have to change the behavior. But other times, especially when people don't have any principle in terms of I go by these standards, but it's simply a diluted guilt that they experience, then is when it's working against them. And I think guilt is one answer to this particular example that you are mentioning. The effect of guilt hasn't been eliminated in spite of the fact of giving approval. And of course, what I said at the beginning, what do I gain out of this kind of sex? It's physically enjoyable for a limited amount of time, but what is before and after, especially after? And people are left with a sense of, now what? Now, unfortunately, that attraction in many cases is vanishing. There is no attraction anymore. And that, of course, is a mentally unhealthy experience.
Now, I'm thinking about the fact that in recent years they've discovered the love hormone, oxytocin, that you actually chemically pair bond to the person you're having that sexual encounter with, and then you walk away from it having been, the Bible talks about the fact that two become one, and that it's not the same as other sins because it actually bonds you to that person. And walking away from people's got to leave you with a little bit of guilt in your life.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. I haven't studied that particular topic, but I believe that sex comes in a context of love, acceptance, and that is deprived in a casual sexual encounter.
Let me flip it over a little bit, because for me, the past isn't really what bothers me. I have become a Christian in the last 25 years. I place great hope in the fact that God not only forgives my past, but says, I can make something new out of you. I can make a new creature out of you. And so that's not probably where my struggle lies. I'm probably on the flip side with anxiety, which the book calls excess future. On the one hand, I know the Bible says, consider the ant, you sluggard, right? Preparing for the future is important. I need to think down the road about taking care of my family. But at what point does that become inappropriate, thinking about the future? At what point do I move into irrational anxiety?
Most of the times when one thinks about the future is being exaggerated and is in the path of anxious behaviors. We just simply do not know about the future. We can guess about the future. We can see the things coming, but we have very little knowledge of it. And whenever we are putting our health, both physically and mental, into something that is uncertain, it's very unwise to do it. Winston Churchill said a sentence about a friend of his that was dying, and one of the last things that he said was, in my life, I have had many, many worries. Most of them never happened.
Right.
And that I think is something to remember, that whenever we are worried too much about it, not that we don't have to plan and we don't have to anticipate and be prepared, but when that anticipation fills it up our whole selves of it, and especially if it is a negative one, we can indeed accelerate processes of illness and suffer in the process, considering that we don't even know what the future is going to bring us. And this is, in fact, a central theme or is meant to be, or it was meant to be, of the book, The Power of Hope, because hope is what counteracts in this human process of being anxious, of being fearful about the future, because that's what anxiety is. Of course, anxiety clinically, it comes in ways that are sort of by surprise and affect physiological processes also. So it is an illness as well. But one can feed it being fearful about anything that is going to happen. So again, we do have certain amount of control over our thoughts, past and future. Past more for depression, future more for anxiety.
I know we've got to take another break here in about 2 minutes, and so maybe it's going to be frustrating to start down this road. But the power of hope is not just about the medicine or the psychology. It's also talking about the role of faith and hope and what perhaps the Christian faith has to offer, what the Bible has to offer. When it comes to depression and anxiety, what is it about Christianity that really helps people conquer that? That's a big topic, but let's get started on it for a couple of minutes.
Well, I believe that it is the Bible, and the Bible messages are excellent ways to deal with adverse thinking. When one memorizes certain verses and repeats those verses in moments of pessimistic thought, for example, and that is something that the person of faith has. It's a sort of weapon that other people do not have because they don't believe, they don't think that there is any sacred about those words, whereas those of us who have faith, then we think that they come from God, and therefore they are soothing. I believe that you should memorize scriptures, or at least write them in a little piece of paper and carry them with you, and pull the little paper or repeat the memorized text in moments that are difficult. That very exercise is a way of dealing with what the Bible can do for us in these difficult times of thoughts that are inappropriate. But of course, there is more to it. And it is a belief in something that God has promised for us. And God has promised things for today, for tomorrow, and for eternity. And of course, that covers it all.
Okay, we're going to take the break, and I want to come right back to that, because I think in the book you identify a few keys that come from the story of Eden that help us be real about the world we live in and find a little relief from stress. My guest today on the program is Dr. Julian Melgosa, co-author of a brand new book called The Power of Hope from Pacific Press. Go to voiceofprophecy.com. We'll put a link in today's show notes so that you can get a copy of that book for yourself. We're talking about stress, anxiety, mental health, and what you can do to live a more abundant life in your thought life as well as your physical life. I'll be right back.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, Does My Life Really Matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
And we are back for the final segment of the program. My guest today has been fantastic. Dr. Julian Melgosa, co-author of The Power of Hope. We've been talking about things like depression, anxiety, stress, and then we were starting to talk about faith and the words of the Bible. And Dr. Melgosa, you've been talking about read the Scripture, memorize the Scripture, find the comfort that those words have to offer. I think one of the things that really grabbed me in the book is the statement, Pandora does not exist. And I think that Pandora would be that mythical world in the James Cameron movie. It's a utopia, and I guess utopia doesn't exist. And the book talks about coming face to face and accepting the real world the way that it is, not having unreal expectations. And I'm wondering sometimes if utopia, these utopian ideas like Pandora, aren't just our memory of Eden. The Bible says God has put eternity in the human hearts. We all seem to have a memory of a better world. And I wonder sometimes if I think the Bible offers a good explanation as to why our world is hard and why it's broken. Is our sinful fallen state a part of our depression and anxiety? Is that a root cause?
Well, it may be in the sense that the performance of certain acts that are called sins in the Bible will bring about consequences that have to do with depressive disorder. Some of the symptoms of depression have to do with having very little motivation, very little strength, to sleeping, too little or perhaps too much every day, to be agitated, to be having feelings of worthlessness. Obviously, as we have just mentioned, a free casual sex may bring feelings that are not good. So there is some sort of correlation. But I also would like to make a statement in terms of we cannot judge a person that is suffering from depressive symptoms as someone who has moved away from the Lord.
Great point.
It's a very dangerous thing. So, yes, I mean, we are touched. We have every single painful disease or experience in the world. We have to point it out to the side of evil that there is in our existence. But let's also be careful and caring for the people who suffer from mental illness, and they are not any worse sinners than the rest of the healthy people as well.
Excellent. I'm thinking of that story of the man born blind where the disciples say, "What did his parents do, Jesus? What did they do that he deserved this?" And the fact is, bad things happen in a broken world, and it's not necessarily because you've done something wrong. We just live in a broken world. And I take great comfort from the fact that when I read the Bible, it tells me that God knows the world is broken, and he has a plan to restore it. He's not ignorant of the suffering that we endure. That brings me huge hope. And I'm not even afraid of death anymore, right? That comes up in the book. Death is mentioned a number of times. I don't even have to be anxious about death as a Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is, of course, it's a theoretical thought because a person that is facing death, even persons of faith, is very rare that they will not have certain amount of fear. But absolutely, it can be a support that, especially a peaceful death that is not, a sudden death that approaches very, very quickly. It's just a change of a status. Is the understanding that when I go to sleep, I am dead, but I'm going to wake up and I'm going to see Jesus. Those thoughts are wonderful. I have talked to people who were facing death or they were on a terminal disease. And people who are believers, I ask them, what are the things that occupy your mind? They say, well, I think of the new earth that the Lord will have prepared or is preparing for me. I think quite a bit about life in that setting, and that is a wonderful way of approaching death. You know, there is nothing that is going to end. Everything is actually a different stage that is eternal and is glorious and is absolutely healthy that will come after this life. So yes, having the religious hope, because in psychology we talk about hope that things will be better. That is healthy. That's definitely healthy, but it is not complete. Religious hope is complete in the sense that goes beyond death into eternity.
One of the things that I really like, you mentioned eternity, and we've touched on Eden and things. The topic of the Sabbath comes up in this book, and it's in the context of stress. In the book, stress is called excess present. Anxiety is excess future, depression, excess past. Stress can be defined as excess present. And then you bring up the biblical Sabbath. Now, I've heard people, even people of faith, say, oh, what a burden the Sabbath is. That's an oppression, and that really ruins your life. I've got to say that I discovered the Sabbath 25 years ago. I don't find it oppressive at all. I found it a huge gift. What is the role of the Sabbath? What is God's gift in the Sabbath that really can help us with a well-balanced mental health outlook?
The Sabbath has many purposes, and they are all very beneficial for our health and for our mind. And one of them is to keep us away from the business of every day of the previous week. I remember very distinctly in my days I was beginning my career, and there was this woman who had a husband who was a contractor that had lots of work, and one day came to me and said, I think the Sabbath has saved the life of my husband, because if it hadn't been for the Sabbath, where he comes to stop all the demand that he has for work and keeps the Sabbath 24 hours without worrying and without working about his normal work, he already would be dead. That was her. Of course, it may have been exaggerated, but it was a reality of how the Sabbath was saving the life on this particular individual. So we're talking about freeing from the slavery of having to work all the time, but especially having the opportunity to meet the Creator and to be able to spend more time in prayer, more time in worship, more time in fellowship, more time in witnessing. That will bring an excellent peace that only can be achieved through a Sabbath day.
I find it interesting. If the Sabbath is about getting close to the Creator God, then it would only make sense that if you use those 24 hours to know Him better, the better you would know God. Wouldn't you say that things like stress and anxiety come into a better focus? Maybe you can place them where they belong when you get to know that there is a God who both loves you and is in control.
Yes, certainly. Many people have experienced that having a very close friendship with the Lord has brought a lot of peace to their lives. And if they use that 24 hours in the Sabbath, or a number of hours that you can reasonably spend apart from sleeping and taking care of your own needs, but not only on the Sabbath, but frequent encounters with God through little prayer here, little prayer there, thought here, thought there. It's a way of having a perspective that if we were not doing things like that, we would be just very myopic in looking at things and then becoming very worried, very anxious of things that with the right perspective, they are meaningless, really.
You mentioned in the book, you mentioned at the head of the program, at the top of the show today, acts of service. You mentioned, going out and doing things. And the book talks about acts of service as a treatment for depression. It would seem to me that in that case, you're not just getting to know God better, you're maybe replicating His character in your own life. How does that work? How would an act of service help me overcome depressive thoughts?
It is, in fact, I mentioned gratitude in terms of attitude, and altruistic behavior, service behavior is the acting part that is being found to have a tremendous effect on depression. The depressive person tends to think about oneself and about the miserable life that they have to live. And we cannot be judging them wrongly because those are kinds of thoughts that are partly produced because of chemical or neurochemical processes in the brain. But it is also true that they have a lot of control over how they are going to think of themselves and their surroundings and their future. And the person who is serving others, it will temporarily be putting the thoughts that normally come about the negative self and the negative circumstances into the service to others that have a need, that you can see that their need is met via something that you are doing for them. All that time, it is being taken away from yourself. And all that time is being looking at something that, in spite of your situation, you can do for others. It is innate that we have that great satisfaction of doing something good for someone else, and that enhances the feeling of misery that the depressive person has. For the believer, it has even more meaning because it is being more like Christ.
Right.
This prescription of service is done by psychotherapists that don't even believe, but they know
Really?
that this works, and then they assign people to volunteer, to do things for the community, to help people in need, etc., etc. And that's wonderful. But for the believer, it has even more meaning because it's being like Jesus.
Fantastic. Listen, I can't believe we're out of time. I wish I had 5 hours with you today because this material's fantastic. The Power of Hope, one of the best little books I've ever read on emotional health, anxiety, depression, stress. If somebody today is wrestling, Dr. Melgosa, maybe life's overwhelming. They're having a little trouble getting out of bed in the morning. They don't want to face today. They're uptight. They're anxious about the future. What's their first step? I mean, obviously get a copy of this book. That's my first recommendation to you out there. Go get a copy of The Power of Hope. I'll put a link on our website at The Voice of Prophecy. But what's the first step for somebody who wants to come out of that dark hole?
Well, you just mentioned a perfect example for depression. That's the lack of motivation, not being able to get out of bed and starting the day is the first step, the first challenge that depressive people have. They need to find some sort of external support. They need to find a spouse, a friend, someone who will be there either with a text or with a telephone call, telling, okay, we are going to go and I will be waiting for you at this time outside your door, giving them the push to do it. This is from the human viewpoint. If the person has the faith to pray God and believe that God can do, can supply the energy that they don't have, is, Lord, help me today. You are going to be with me all the time. My mood will become better as I encounter people and as I do things. Be with me, help me now. Those are the sort of supports that one needs to start the day. And then once they start, they are more able to keep going. A depressive person shouldn't be left alone. Of course, there are risks of suicide. Right. There are problems that are very complicated. So they need support. And I see that the sources of support right there, another friend, another person, and also have faith in God that God can give me that little extra push that I don't have. That would be my advice for that person early in the morning.
Dr. Melgosa, I can't believe it. The clock is going to run out of time in about 30 seconds. I want to thank you so much for joining me on the show today and helping underline the fact that it's not hopeless. We do live in a broken world, and things happen, but you don't have to live in a constant state of anxiety or depression or stress. The name of the book, The Power of Hope. You can find it at thevoiceofprophecy.com. Look in the show notes, and we'll put a link there. Doctor, thank you so much for your time today, and I know you're busy, but thanks for joining me on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It has been my pleasure to talk to you, and I wish you success and that you may be able to help with this little practical book.
Thank you so much. You've been listening to Disclosure. I'm Sean Boonstra. Until next time.